Hey folks, who doesn't love just random unexpected news? No one. That's the answer. Everyone loves random unexpected news. Um, at least when it's good like this, right? So if you're watching this channel, there's a good chance that you know, but if not, the Warhammer community site recently just announced that they're going to be releasing the Toma Champions. They had a very clever saying to make it clear that they meant to have this out in 2021, probably like December, probably before Christmas, something like that. But that time moves crazy in in the realm of chaos. My sense is that it has to do something with their sort of paper issues with shipping. I know sourcing things from China, etc., has been difficult for them recently. But either way, great news for us, right? We have a total invasion coming of all the Underworlds warbands coming into Warcry. It's going to shake up Warcry quite a bit, potentially, right? And so I'm really excited to talk about it because, one, the first six of them that came in totally changed how you approach Chaos warbands on a budget. Just as far as a lot of these retail for $25. If it's similar to how it worked in Bladeborn, they're going to be around 600 points, meaning, any two of them, you just combine them, you cut the weakest one, two fighters, and then you have yourself a Warcry warband for $50. Or you go and you get one of these plus your favorite single box from that faction, and then you just have this really functional warband for, again, pretty cheap, and you still have a ton of options the way you wouldn't normally if you bought like a box and a hero. So that's really exciting. Also, the ally mechanic is going to combine with this to make list building choices really fascinating. So in Chaos right now, because you can ally in sort of these things in an interesting combination where you ally in the leader, and then if you have the leader, you get to bring in its friends. That just gives you a ton of options. Again, like in my first Bladeborn Underworlds guide, I did a few lists. Quick trivia for some people, one of the lists I posted in that video is illegal, and if you can tell me which one, you get no prize. But, clout. You get clout. The So the ally mechanic makes for just an incredible world of list building choices. Um, you know, that's actually quite complex and interesting. So that's going to be really exciting. And then finally, we also just have a tournament coming soon. So Adepticon's not going to have any allies allowed. Reading the tournament pack, it sounds like you can have heroes, but no allies. So you can bring in these underworld warbands, even if you're not using them as your leader, but you won't be able to ally them across factions. I almost wonder if they knew about this coming in beforehand. I don't know. You could really argue either way about sort of how how much the tournament organizers know about Warcry in general, how much they believe that a tournament scene exists, right? I mean, does GW know that my channel exists, or know that the Warcry Discord exists with bunches of people who are obsessed over Warcry list building? Who knows, right? Who knows how much they know? But I think it's really interesting. And I do still think that this could shake things up. They did give us stats for two of the fighters. Dew and Claw, unfortunately, is pretty terrible. Those stats would be broken at 65 points, competitively viable at 90 points, and casually playable at 110, and at 130 it's just it's rough to justify putting Dew and Claw in your warband, but that's okay. Prince Duval I think is pretty interesting, as far as you get a Vampire Lord for 225 that's got flying. Prince Duval doesn't fly, but otherwise, fighting stats wise is really intriguing for that points cost. you know SBG is still going to probably take the Vargoyle in a competitive situation, but I would say Prince Duval slots in for like a 3 or 4-way tie for second place as far as SBG leaders, and that I think is a perfect place to be. You can absolutely use Duval in your warband, and then depending on what Duval's leader ability is, you could do something pretty cool. You know, we don't know with both Claw and Prince Duval what they're capable of, so it's possible, maybe Claw's 130 point ridiculous point value is due to the fact that it's just got multiple invincible abilities. Who knows? But something I'm excited about is the sheer number that are coming into the game and the way it can kind of shake up how you play your warbands, both for competitive and also for not so competitive warbands. So I just wanted to go over it, right? We've got 3 of them coming in that are going to be aiding factions that are currently at the tippy top of the meta. Just doing really intense stuff on the board when you min-max them. These are things where a single powerful fighter from any of these Underworlds warbands could just totally break stuff competitively in the game, which I think is really cool. Well, if it actually happens, I won't think it's cool, but whatever. But what's more exciting than that is these ones in blue. These are very competitive factions that are kind of knocking at the door of the VIP club, as I put here, that say Skaven or Stormcast Vanguard or Ogres all are in. And they're just one piece away from joining that party right at the tippy top, at the pinnacle there. And that's pretty exciting if you look at, say, SBG with 2 tries here, or Gitz with 3 bites at the apple. I think that's... yeah, huge potential there to kind of change the way the Warcry metagame works out. And then we've also got things coming into other places. So in green, these are factions that they're just one piece away from being competitive. And it's probably impossible, even for a really busted unit coming out of these warbands, to kind of break the game with them. But that's okay, because a really busted unit, it's only because they're unique, so you can't spam anything in these. But that's okay, because a really busted unit could bring them into a competitive place that could be really exciting. And Sylvaneth is so close. I'll get to that later in the video, but Sylvaneth just, it needs the tiniest nudge to be able to get into a really competitive place. And it's also got 2 tries here. In yellow, we've got things that, warbands that are weak even in casual play. Doing your best to tune up a really powerful warband in these factions still often leads you with something where it's just not even equal to kind of lower tuned versions of other warbands. And so I think there's huge potential to, have something that just saves that faction and gives you something where you can run this and all of a sudden you're kind of really playing Warcry, at a more sort of tuned level, or something that, you can put that in there and then not tune the rest of your warband, but you still have something functional, right? I mean, that can be really great too. There's a huge amount of potential for the Death Grand Alliance here. I know I circled Sepulchral Guard before I realized it was for SBG and not Night Haunt, but it's still true in that Night Haunt and Bone Reapers are sort of, the issues they have are very fixable. Bone Splitter is also way stronger than the other yellows here, but also sort of below the greens. They're one where strong fighters into Bone Splitters could really change that faction up as well. So I wanted to just kind of get into some of the specifics, because I'm excited for these. Spikeclaw's Swarm going into Skaven. Skaven, obviously, the real boogeyman faction other than Tarantulos. So the Verminous stuff, right? Spikeclaw's Swarm is all Clan Verminous. That tends to be the weakest Skaven stuff. Maybe you could argue Eshin is weaker, I don't know. But that kind of gives you kind of a lower potential to break it. It's unlikely that we see Spikeclaw's Swarm be a part of sort of a new busted Skaven list. But it's very possible that we see it become part of an alternate build of Skaven that's either almost as strong or just as strong. And I don't think Spikeclaw itself is going to break anything, just because Skaven leaders tend to be combo pieces. So you get either the Bringer of the Woe or the Plague Priest, where their job is to, lead from the back and power up Plague Monks. You've got the Master Molder, whose job is to combo with Rat Ogres in a way that's more sort of hard to disrupt than if you use a Packmaster to do the Rat Ogre combo. Those are generally competitively what you're using Skaven leaders to do. You're really only going to pick between one of those three. And because of that, even if Spike Claw is just like a really busted fighter, you probably wouldn't break the game with it just because you have to kind of give up on those combo pieces to do it. So I think that kind of gives them a lot of leeway to make this warband solid without actually changing things competitively for Skaven, which I think is cool. I'm excited to see what they show up. I'm not too worried about what could happen from this. Hrothgorn's Man Trappers are a little scary. So we have a few things, right? So competitively, you can go a lot of directions with ogres. Tyrants are really powerful. The Lead Belcher leader, the Thunder Fist is what it's called. That is really powerful. The current Frost Saber is really good as just like a one-of piece. And Noblars kind of run things. Noblars are really, really good. So Noblar upgrades could be really scary if these are kind of around the same price as regular Noblars, but, give a few extra wrinkles. That could make ogres even scarier. If Hrothgorn's shooting attack is on the same level as Thunderfist's, but he's maybe also got a side of fries as far as more abilities, that could be really scary. Same with like a Frost Saber upgrade. People already sometimes run Frost Sabers in their competitive lists already. But right now it's pretty debatable whether you'd prefer to do that or a Yeti or a Gorger. If this new Frost Saber is stronger than current ones, that could kind of settle that debate and put ogres kind of even higher up there, which could be pretty crazy. Also, depending on what rules we see around this trap, could give more abilities, which again, more wrinkles, could potentially be really powerful. So I'm a little bit worried about the Man Trappers, but I'm also excited to see what happens. I think that there's some room in ogres to make them more flexible without breaking them, and so hopefully that's what the Man Trappers achieve there. Farstriders, a little less worried here. So competitive Burb Guard, I called it, but competitive Stormcast Vanguard, they tend to either use Hurricane Raptors or a Night Venator plus a ton of birds, right? So, you see Vanguard Hunters sometimes, but not as often, and you almost never more than one. So you'd need to see like major upgrades in terms of point for point value here in order to change that dynamic. And even if you did, it would probably only be a slight change. I can't imagine, so the core of the warband is still going to be the same. You might just potentially have a small sort of upgrade or side grade to give a different option, different look for, compared to the Hurricane Raptors or the Night Venator. So pretty low alert level here. Not too worried, but you could see something interesting, and it is something where people build their competitive Vanguard lists differently right now. There's no real consensus on, which of the two options you want to be using. And so if there's all of a sudden a third option that people aren't decided which is most powerful, I think that's great from a list building perspective. Now let's get into some of the things I had circled in blue before that are just one piece away from getting into the top of the table. And I'm most excited for Gloomspite Gitz because they get 3 bites of the apple here. I think the one with the most potential is Molog's Mob, just because Bat Squig, if this is like flying and really cheap and kind of similar to an Aether Wing, that could really move the needle for Gloomspite. Even just having one of it could kind of change how the whole warband plays. And the Mushroom and the Stalagmite, who knows what they're going to do, what their abilities are going to be. It's all pretty wild, right? Gloomspite already has a ton of abilities at their disposal. That's one of the things that makes them so close, that makes them currently very competitive and so close to being sort of more than just competitive and kind of dictating the meta the way those last 3 warbands do. So, a new crazy ability would combine with Gitz in a lot of different ways. I guess one thing about Gitz is that because they have so many good abilities already, a new ability would have to be incredible in order to actually shine in the most competitive builds. But because they're getting these 3 options, no matter what, I mean, already in my casual tier list, I put Gloomspite either number 1 or number 2. And this is only going to just broaden their list building even more in a really exciting way. As for the other 2, I think it's hard to imagine Wolves being stronger than the Squig Hopper boss, at least competitively. But I wouldn't be surprised if it just gives a really exciting kind of alternate build that could be fun, even if it's not as, quote unquote powerful. It still could be really sweet. As far as Zarbag's Gitz, I have no idea what Fanatics will be capable of. I think that's sort of a really interesting opportunity for them to kind of flex a little bit. I imagine that it's something with kind of similar Gitz defensive stats, but then maybe 3-inch range and potentially a lot of damage. That could be an interesting piece. Also, if they have an upgraded netter, it wouldn't change the game for Gloomspite, but it could just add a new kind of wrinkle. Same with if those shooters are upgraded from regular shooters. That's another thing where just when you're designing a list, when you have extra points at the end, you upgrade those and you get a little bit more power. Who knows? Zarbag himself, wizards tend to be unplayable in Warcry. I expect Zarbag will be the same, but you never know, right? The Stormcast Wizard and the Swampkala Shaman from Dominion came in just a little bit more intriguing than Wizards usually do. So they've shown that they're kind of that they're at least aware that Wizards are currently unplayable and that they're pushing them a little bit further lately. So if Zarbag is pushed, maybe 2 notches more than what they did with the 2 Dominion Wizards, that could also change the game. But I would be pretty surprised if they did that. Some other kind of roundup highlights. Seraphon already have the best ranged chaff in the game. Blowpipe skinks are terrifying. But one of their issues, especially for no ally tournaments like Adepticon's going to be, is that none of their leaders really synergize with the plan. Everyone loves the Slann, but it's very expensive, and to make the most out of it, you also need a couple like big melee threats, and now you're just spending a ton of points that isn't on blowpipe skinks. So the Slann build is really, it's reasonably powerful, but it's not as powerful, and it's going in a totally different direction, which is great for casual play, but competitively it's not broken, which is a good thing. But you could see something if the Skink Priest here is sort of a big upgrade from the current Skink Priest, or if the Old Blood is really good, you could see something changing. Also, that Chameleon Skink and the Blowpipe Skink there, if those are upgrades from the regular Blowpipe Skinks, that could add a little bit of power. There's just a lot that you could see potentially sort of bringing them into that top tier if they get even just a small upgrade. Morgwaith's Blade Coven is pretty cool. So Doc, they're interesting, right? They have an incredible leader in the Bloodrack Medusa. They've got 2 really solid chaff options in their Sisters of Slaughter with knives and their Witch Elves. So they are a highly competitive faction, but they're not sort of dictating the meta quite yet because they don't really have like a second trick other than the Bloodrack. Like if you compare Doc to Slaanesh, right? The Bloodrack, almost as strong as the Contorted Epitome. Sisters of Slaughter, debatably stronger than Demonettes. Witch Elves just a little bit worse than Demonettes. But Slaanesh has the sort of wrinkle of these 2 fiends, that the Fiend of Slaanesh like runs across the board and like is sort of another control piece, and some factions, if it was just the Contorted Epitome, they could handle it, but because of those 2 fiends also being there, it's just way too much disruption for them, right? So Slaanesh sort of has that second trick beyond the Contorted Epitome that makes them really powerful. And the Slaughter Queen is kind of, at least from what other people have said and from kind of looking at the stats, is sort of a potential second trick, but it's kind of just okay. It's not, certainly not on the level of having two fiends running around the board. So literally any of these fighters could provide that, which is pretty sweet if you're a Daughters of Cain player. Looking at the sort of Hag Queen here, the current Hag Queen isn't very good, so if this is a big upgrade, that could be strong. If the Bow Snake is really good, having a ranged option as sort of a second thing to be doing beyond just like powerful chaff and a powerful leader. If you also have a ranged unit that's good, that could be a big deal. If any of these three chaff fighters are an upgrade, that could be a big deal. So there's a lot to watch for with Morgwith's Blade Coven that could really change how Doc functions right now and could kind of bump them up. Again, like I said before, I think of them as being like Slaanesh but missing one piece, and if they get a piece, that could be really, really significant for them. Finally, the Grimwatch. Flesh Eater Courts have really good flyers, right? The Infernal Courtier is amazing. The Crypt Flayer is a really solid, kind of smaller flyer. Their chaff units, though, are solid. They're good, but they're not sort of breaking anything, which is a good thing, again. But they're kind of samey. They're all kind of moving the same way. And there's a lot of potential upgrades here where even a side grade could add a lot to Flesh Eater Courts, right? Like, so if some of these sort of other ghoul sculpts, if they're not stronger than ghouls, but just different, right? If they have like a slightly different role, maybe it's a 65 point, but you get a lot for it, and then it's like you'd put one of them in there. That could give Flesh Eater Courts a little bit of a different look that I think could really help them. Same, if the bats are really good, and it's sort of like you get a third flying unit and it's really good, but it's not doing the same thing as the other flying units. Similar kind of to what Morgwith's Blade Coven could give for Daughters of Cain. You could see the Grimwatch give Flesh Eater Courts a new dimension that kind of brings them up into the highest tiers. There's a lot to watch for there that I think could be really, really strong for them. So after that kind of the really competitive warbands, there's a few factions in the game where they are playing competitive Warcry. You can do some min-maxing with them. You can create lists that are like extremely powerful to the point of, like in casual play, extremely powerful to the point of being a little unpleasant to play against, but that they're just not as scary as, some of the things that Seraphon can do or Daughters can do, even without these additions, right? Like these are all warbands that can win any tournament, even though they're not sort of the top tier. Sylvaneth and Khorne Mortals, for example, they're just not quite there. But one piece could kind of bring them there, and if it's really broken, well, even then, being unique probably wouldn't vault them into the top tier, which is, I think, a great opportunity. So like Sylvaneth, for example, they've got they have an entire roster of role players, right? So they've got lots of chaff options, which is great. They've got lots of very playable leader options, which is great. But none of them are strong enough to be like the scary thing that makes it so that you could bring Sylvaneth into a tournament and, think that you're giving yourself a chance to win it. But all of them are good enough to be role players, right? So the Arch Revenant or the Kurnoth Hunters, those could all be role players in a faction with really busted chaff, or all of their chaff options could be role players in a faction with really busted leaders. So they really only need one or two strong fighters to totally bump them up a level, which is great because they've got two different warbands coming. So you only need a little bit. So, if we get Scathe, I think that's the Centaur. If Scathe is really scary and really good and doesn't have the mount keyword, you could see that being something that really, really pumps up Sylvaneth. Same with Ylthari. If Ylthari just has like a really amazing spell and isn't kind of limited the way most casters are in this game, that could be great. Or if any of the, there's a whole bunch of chaff options coming in here, sort of this cheap shooter. Um, if these are tree revenants but upgraded, that could be another thing where it's just you upgrade their chaff and all of a sudden their current leaders are good enough to lead these guys into being a pretty strong warband. So there's a lot that Sylvaneth could get here that could turn them from being sort of pretending to be a competitive faction but not actually being it to like legitimately scary in a tournament. Khorne, Bloodbound are in the exact same spot, where Blood Reavers, very solid. The Wrathmaster is very solid, better even than I think the Kurnoth Hunter leader, just very, very solid. But they're kind of playing the same game. They don't have a lot of mobility. They don't have, well, that's really a lot of it is their lack of mobility. And then, all their options are just like almost good enough to be something that really dictates play. An upgraded Fleshhound could absolutely change the way they play, even with just one model. Blood Warriors, I don't anticipate they'll really change anything, but if this Fleshhound comes in and it's, maybe it's a little more expensive than the current one, which is at 170, and this is like 185, but it's got maybe another ability, or it's got like a lot of power to it, something like that. That could really change the way Khorne works right now, right? Because then you could see yourself doing the Wrathmaster plus the Fleshhound plus, whether or not you're a big believer in, I'm forgetting the name of the one with the pull ability. I know a lot of people love that one. And then just a bunch of Blood Reavers, something like that could be really, really strong, right? Because right now the Fleshhound in Khorne Mortals, it doesn't have the abilities that it has in Demons, which makes it a lot weaker in Bloodbound. So that could, this could really change up how Bloodbound plays, which could potentially vault them up a level, which is great. I also want to get into a few factions where they're really struggling right now, and I think there's a ton of opportunity for them to be kind of saved. So I didn't include Nurgle Mortals because you're likely going to see that faction just be three powerful big chunkers that don't change the limitations of the faction. Thorns of the Briar Queen. Tons of opportunities here to provide a really solid chaff upgrade where, currently Chain Rasps are just kind of frustrating to build lists with because you're not getting that much for the 80 points that they have. The flying is good, but they just cost so much for how much damage they do and how killable they are. So if these are stronger than Chain Rasps, or if these are better Chain Rasps, you get 4 of them. I mean, the one with the shield is definitely going to be bad, but the other 4, that could really change how Nighthaunt plays. If you get to play 4 better Chain Rasps in your list, and then, then you only have to put maybe 1 or 2 regular Chain Rasps, and then, you can focus on your other stuff. Conversely, if the Briar Queen, if that kind of thorn whip she's got, if that has really solid stats to it, that could add something. Although, they've got their Knight of Shrouds on Steed. I think that's a really strong leader. So, well, not really strong, but it's certainly playable. So you could see the Thorns of the Briar Queen sort of really changing how Nighthaunt plays. And especially if we get stats for the crossbows soon, you could see Nighthaunt in 2 months might be a completely different warband than Nighthaunt right now is, which I think is really cool. So yeah, Nighthaunt players, you definitely have reasons for rejoicing. Ironjaws, I'm kind of skeptical that what they do will mean anything, but there is some potential here where if these Ardboys are sort of really aggressively costed, these 3 behind the leader here, if they're really aggressively costed, if you get a lot for the points, let's say they're the same price as Ardboys, but they're significantly better, or if they're similar to Ardboys but cheaper, that could really open up Ironjaw's list building. in a really big way, actually. And because their main issue is that they just can't cover enough of the board because they're both slow and there's not very many of them. But man, do they win fights once they get there. So, changing up that dynamic could really help them. The other thing that makes me hopeful for Iron Jaws here is Games Workshop has shown that they actually have a pretty good understanding right now of how unplayable Move 3 is. Let's talk about this with Fire Slayers too, right? Both of these warbands, Iron Jaws and Fire Slayers, are mostly Move 3 warbands. That's why they're struggling so much. And some of the more recent rules updates that Games Workshop has put out, since these warbands were put into the game, show that they realize that you need to pump up Move 3 fighters a little bit more to make them playable. It's something that they haven't shown, for example, with knowing how broken really cheap fighters are. So it does give me some hope, not for the Brute Band or not for the Worm Spat going into Nurgle, because those are going to be expensive fighters, but for both the Chosen Axes and for Iron Jaws, where you might see some cheap fighters here that are sort of boosted up to compensate for having Move 3, and that could really change, how these play. So if these sort of Chosen Axes, I can't remember for the life of me what the names of the various Fire Slayers are. I think these are Volkites, or I don't know. But if the cheap ones are really good, I don't anticipate they'll be really good, but if they're significantly better than the current Fire Slayers options, because Games Workshop understands how to point Move 3 fighters now, that could make Fire Slayer, that could be a really huge boon. Also sort of a new leader option for them could be really good. They have a few leaders that are, interesting, but then when you look at their stats for what you're getting, it's really crippling. And so again, if they sort of make up for having Move 3 there, that could be really solid. And of course, the same thing for Brutes, right? If they kind of show, or Brutes and Ardboys, if they show that they're, going to point more aggressively because they understand how big of a disadvantage Move 3 is, we could see some real upgrades there, and that would be really good for them. All right, so there's a lot to be excited about. I'm really happy about this development. The one thing that is a bit of a curse is I've been planning a lot of kind of introduction to the Warcry competitive metagame for people who are maybe discovering this channel recently. I've been getting sort of a lot more looks or engagement in the last sort of 2-3 months than before. So people who are new to this channel recently, don't know a ton about competitive Warcry, who are kind of interested in learning more before Adepticon. I was playing a few videos for that kind of audience, updating my competitive tier list, stuff like that. And we don't know when these Underworlds warbands are going to be available. So please, in the comments, let me know if you'd like to see updates to competitively, sort of competitive roundups of Warcry right now, or if you'd like me to wait to see if these shake things up. Because, there's a lot of potential for changes with this sort of Tome of Champions update. And who knows, it's possible that the Adepticon Warcry metagame could be a little bit different, in 2 months than it is now. So let me know if you're interested in some updates soon, and then we just incorporate these as they go, or if you want to wait to have sort of one definitive pre-tournament thing. Let me know what you're interested in. I can't guarantee I'll listen, but yeah, that's how it is, and I'm very excited for how these could shake things up going into our first sort of big public tournaments. So until then, may all your rolls be crits.